Welcome back to Indiana at the voice of college football. And this is the big one, folks. Indiana and Ohio State this week. And big noon kickoff, Saturday game on Fox. It's going to be massive. And there's a lot of twists and turns that Indiana and college football has had along the way. For Indiana, most of those twists and turns have ended up positively. That's why they're 10-0 for the first time in history. But now that we are getting toward the end of the year and their biggest matchup of the year in the Ohio State Buckeyes, there are a lot of negative attacks being sent Indiana's way. A few injuries cropped up against Michigan, their toughest opponent that they have faced yet this year. And it has all culminated in this game against the Ohio State Buckeyes. I can't wait to get into it and more because we got a lot to talk about, even more than just this game itself. But the Indiana Hoosiers are 10-0 for the first time in history, and they have a chance to knock off Ohio State for the first time since 1988 and go 11-0 for the first time in program history and lock up a college football playoff bid in the process. So definitely just massive things going Indiana's way. But why is Indiana 10-0? What has gotten them here? Well, a big reason is because of the fact that Curt Cignetti and the fact that he comes to Indiana over from James Madison and just goes off running. I win. Google me, he said, before, anything major happened, before any, major players came over to IU. That's what he said. And then he said Purdue sucks, but so does Michigan and Ohio State, which everybody's calling it like the three, game conquest for Curt Cignetti after he trashed those teams on Assembly Hall's court for Indiana basketball back last, year when he first got hired. And now he beat Michigan. Now he's got to go through the Buckeyes and the Boilermakers to finish it off. But still, Curt Cignetti is a big reason why Indiana is where they're at. And they gave him a contract extension. What do you know? I've been saying it all year. Indiana was going to pay Curt Cignetti, and they were going to do everything in their power to keep him in Bloomington. Because, yes, he was already a candidate for all these potential job openings. Mind you, they're not even open jobs yet. Talking about Florida, Florida State, Oklahoma, Auburn, West Virginia. All these programs hadn't even fired their coaches yet. And still, Curt Cignetti was a candidate for all of those jobs. And I kept saying that I believe that Indiana, with the money that they have, with the NIL money now that is legal and all across the board, people are allowed to, give money as like a donor, some of these really well, paid alumni, kind of like a Mark Cuban, for example. Mark Cuban graduated from Indiana. He's a multi-billionaire. John Mellencamp, other individuals that have a lot of money at Indiana, they're allowed to give to the program. People are allowed to give to the program, kind of like, you give donations to a nonprofit organization. People can do that. And Indiana is the second largest alumni base in the country. So they got a lot of individuals that have graduated from Indiana, and if they had a good football team, would care and donate to the program. And now that they're winning this year, we've seen a major uptick in money being sent IU's way from fans along with donors. So that's increased Indiana's NIL game, and that's going to help them get better players. But it's also going to help them keep Curt Cignetti, I said. And like I said, it happened. Curt Cignetti is staying at Indiana for good. He inks a contract extension all the way through 2032. So it's 8 years, and he's going to be making $8 million a year with incentives to possibly make $9 million a year or even $10 million a year if it's really good, close to that. And that would make him in the top 20 highest paid coaches in college football, even above Miami. He's going to be making more money at Indiana than Mario Cristobal is going to be making at Miami. And he's on par with James Franklin basically at Penn State and other programs like that. Hugh Freeze at Auburn. He's in that ballpark. That's how much Curt Cignetti is going to be making at Indiana now that this contract extension is going to be, for next year and beyond, now that it's been inked, and Curt Cignetti is not going anywhere. He said on Big Noon Kickoff and other places, like, why would I go anywhere else? Indiana football is showing the commitment to football for the first time ever in their history. Ever since Indiana football first kicked off back in the 1880s, They did not show a commitment to football. That's why they didn't get Newt Rockne from instead of him going to Notre Dame. Indiana could have got Newt Rockne, but they didn't get Newt Rockne because Notre Dame paid him more. Even all the way back in the 1920s, Notre Dame showed more of an investment for football, and Newt Rockne won a couple titles at Notre Dame. Imagine how different things would have been if he had have gone to Indiana, but that's in the past. Indiana just never committed to football. They also had a good coach in Bo McMillan in the 1940s, but after Bo McMillan's success, wouldn't say faded, but he just decided to move on to the NFL. He didn't see that he could really do any better in Indiana, so he went off to the NFL. Like I said, Indiana's had chances in the past to be good in football. They never fully committed to being a good football program. Every single really good football program that we have today, like Alabama, like Ohio State, all these great programs, they had to start with a coach somewhere. Somebody had to win, and there had to be an investment to football. And yes, we're in 2024, and some people say that it's impossible. Indiana's committing to football for the first time basically ever in their history. And you're seeing it manifest in this contract extension with Curt Cignetti. You saw athletic director Scott Dolson. You saw Pam Whitten, another major person at Indiana University, both say we cannot let Curt Cignetti get away. If he gets poached from another program, we're going to go back to being bad. We're going to go back to mediocrity. And that's not what they wanted to see because they hired him. They hired Curt Cignetti before anyone else did. He was just sitting there at James Madison. He was probably going to be content to retire there. He even said that. Yeah, I was just going to retire at James Madison. But then Indiana came calling. And they said, we want to win. We believe that you're the best guy to do it. When no other program was looking in Curt Cignetti's direction. No other program was like, hey, we want this guy. Even West Virginia, where Curt Cignetti, that's his alma mater, West Virginia, they weren't looking at him. They were sticking it out with Neil Brown. So that's my thing. I just feel like Indiana, for the first time, you could say in forever or ever, they finally made the right decision on hiring a coach. They hired the right guy, and they didn't let him get away. I mean, Tom Allen, credit to Tom Allen and what he did in the program. I've said it all season long that I still don't believe that Indiana is even here right now, even without Tom Allen, because he did have those couple years of success. It did show that Indiana could win. Michael Penix had the couple, really great moments at IU. So I still think that was very important. And when Tom Allen, like he might be getting poached to another program like Florida State. Yes, that was actually legit. Florida State was on Tom Allen's radar back then. Indiana gave him a contract extension. And yeah, it was only for like $4 million a year, but that set the precedent that Indiana was at least trying to win in football. Then things went south. They fired him, gave him $15 million, a big buyout in college football standards, not even just Indiana standards. That's the biggest buyout in Indiana history. But in college football standards history, I think it was like the third or fourth biggest buyout of all time. So that was big for Indiana to say, hey, like we're getting rid of Tom Allen, one of the winningest coaches in our history. If things aren't going very well now, we're going to get Curt Cignetti. We're going to win. We're going to prove the college football world wrong. And even though no one was expecting this, I wasn't. I thought they were going to go 7-5, which, hey, 7-5 would have been good. I used 10-0, and they're going into this Ohio State game as possibly the biggest game Ohio State has faced this year. You could say Penn State, yeah, I guess. But this game is going to make or break so many things in the college football playoff race. Whether Indiana has a shot to go to the Big Ten title game or not, whether Ohio State is safe for the playoffs. If Ohio State loses, that's the funny thing about this game is everybody's talking about if Indiana loses, will they get into the playoff? Well, what about Ohio State? Will they get in if they lose? Obviously, they probably will because it's Ohio State, but funny how that's not an argument. But if Indiana loses, it is. But still, this is such a big game, and we would have never got to this point without Curt Cignetti, and absolutely a smart decision by Indiana to give him a contract extension. It would have just been absolutely nuts and insane for Indiana to let him get away. And if they did, then Indiana would have gone back to losing. There's no way that they would have struck lightning in a bottle twice. It doesn't normally happen. You don't usually strike twice back-to-back. So I don't think Indiana, whoever they would have hired, would have been anywhere as good as Curt Cignetti. So kudos for Indiana for getting it done. And I said it was going to happen. I said that Indiana football was going to give Curt Cignetti a contract extension. And I said they were going to keep him. Indiana's got the money to do it. They just never used that money for football. They finally are now. And also that means that there's going to be stadium renovation. A lot of things are going Indiana's way right now because of their winning. They're getting fans in the stands. People are interested in Indiana football. It's bringing more money to the school. And now that they're giving Cignetti this contract extension, hopefully they can keep winning. And does it mean they're going to be as good next year? No, it doesn't. Their schedule is probably going to be harder next year. So, yeah, they're probably not going to win as much, and they are going to lose some key players off this year's team. But with Cignetti at the helm, I think they're going to at least be a very solid program. It is watchable on Saturday, something that hasn't been the case for the last 50 years. You get stadium renovations. You can keep those assistants for a while by paying them more. I think Indiana's going to be just fine. They're going to be able to compete in the Big Ten. Maybe not be able to win it or be in contention for the playoff every year. That most likely will not happen. But they can be a competitive program like a Wisconsin or Iowa on a regular basis with Curt Cignetti. And they're giving him the funds to do so. And, yeah, a program can still outbid $8 million. Yeah, I know. Alabama, teams like that can do it. But I don't see Curt Cignetti leaving. His wife likes it in Bloomington. They like it in Bloomington. And Indiana's the program that gave him this opportunity to coach the Power Four. And as long as they keep investing in football, I think Curt Cignetti is going to stay. So this is massive news for Indiana. Massive, massive news. Had to happen, and they got it done. The next question is will an 11-1 Indiana make the college football playoff? Because this is what everybody is talking about. Because the narratives are already starting. The narratives are already starting that Indiana should not make the college football playoff despite just having one loss to Ohio State, which frankly is insane because we've been talking about ever since the 12-team playoff was devised that if you were in the Big Ten or the SEC, especially once all this realignment happened, and you have no losses or one loss, you're going to be in the playoff. If you have two losses, that's the gray area. That's the gray area. And the funny thing about it is most likely we're going to have probably three or four SEC teams in the college football playoff with two losses. And they were even trying to float around the fact, if Georgia loses to Tennessee and they have three losses, they're going to get to the playoff, which is absolutely hilarious to me. I think it's hilarious. Like, you're really going to have a 9-3 Georgia and they make the playoff? Yeah. Doesn't matter how hard their schedule is. They lost 3 games. I mean, I get it is hard to quantify. I get it. It's hard to quantify, looking at, teams that play easier schedules like Penn State or Indiana versus teams like Alabama and Georgia that play tougher schedules. But at the end of the day, you got to win your games. And if you do not win your games, then you don't make the playoff. If you lose 3 or more games, you do not get in. You should not get in. And the thing is with Georgia, it'd be different maybe if all their losses were 1-score games or whatever. It's kind of like that argument with Alabama that one year when they had 2 losses, and both losses they had, they only lost by 6 points combined, and they were saying Bama should have gotten to the playoff. That was a 4-team playoff. If it was a 12-team playoff, then Alabama absolutely would have been into the college football playoff in that scenario, only having 2 losses by 6 points. Georgia lost to Ole Miss by 3 scores. So I just don't think that Georgia would have gotten in with 3 losses. Now, they won, so they only have 2 losses, so they're still in play. If Georgia wins out, they're going to get in. Same thing with Alabama. But now you're creating this log jam where you've got Tennessee, Ole Miss, Alabama, Georgia, Texas A&M. All these teams in the SEC have 2 losses. If they all finish with 2 losses, they're going to probably put all these teams in the playoff. And that's going to come at the expense of somebody. Obviously, the Big Ten champion is going to be in. So whether it's Ohio State or Oregon or even Indiana, if Indiana knocks off Ohio State, makes the Big Ten title game and beats Oregon, the Big Ten title winner is in. And then the ACC and the Big 12 title winner is going to be in, whether it's BYU or Colorado from the Big 12, and the ACC, whether it's Miami, SMU, or Clemson, whoever it is, those teams are in. So you've got the SEC champion, ACC, Big 10, and Big 12. Those 4 are in. So then you have the Group of 5 champion, which will probably, be Boise if they keep winning. They're playing well, so it could be Boise. That leaves 7 spots. If you've got A&M and you've got Tennessee and Bama and Georgia and Ole Miss, that's 5 of those spots. Then you got Penn State. that if it'd have been worse if you still had Miami in this scenario or BYU. If they had a one out and then lost in their conference title game, they probably would have gotten in. But see, now if Miami, just say they play Clemson or SMU and they lose, I don't think Miami gets in with 2 losses. I know there's going to be somebody out there that makes that case. I don't see it. They've had a really easy schedule. You don't win the ACC, I don't think Miami gets in. They already lost to Georgia Tech. They needed to win out and then lose in the ACC title game to get that at large. They're done probably. Then you got BYU. If they had a one out loss in the Big 12 title game, they'd have gotten in. Well, they just lost last week to Kansas, who's 3-6, now 4-6. So if BYU, if they win the Big 12, I don't see it either. Or if they win the Big 12, they're in. But if they lose in the Big 12 title game, if they don't win, I don't see it. I don't see them getting it. So BYU would be done. Miami would be done. That leaves Indiana though, because Indiana with a loss to Ohio State is at 11-1, and you're telling me that they don't get in? Like all those SEC teams are going to pass them, and then some other team from another conference leapfrogs them and they're in to the playoff. That it just doesn't make sense. It'd be different if you had like the Pits still lurking around, or maybe Army if they're in there. I mean, because if Army loses to Notre Dame, they're done. If Boise loses again, I mean, that's going to eliminate at-large, which they probably don't have a shot of an at-large anyway. I mean, they'd have to win out just to get in with the automatic. I don't see it. So the way everything's shaken out, I think Indiana's fine. I mean, according to like the FBI predictor, they have like a 93% chance to make the college football playoff. Honestly, the worst scenario for Indiana would be somehow they lose to Ohio State, but then Ohio State loses, and then Indiana gets in the Big Ten title game anyway. So if Ohio State lost to Michigan, Indiana gets in over Ohio State in the Big Ten title game, then Indiana loses to Oregon, and then they have 2 losses, and then they get knocked out. It would be better for Indiana to lose to Ohio State, beat Purdue, and then get in at 11-1. Now, if Indiana beats Ohio State and loses to Purdue, I still think they get in anyway because, I mean, I think the strength of their record and schedule would go up with a win over Ohio State. That wouldn't be negated enough by a Purdue loss. I mean, that would still be humiliating, but heck, it could happen. Look at Notre Dame beating A&M and then losing Northern Illinois. It can happen. I don't think Cignetti would allow it to happen, but it absolutely could happen. So will an 11-1 Indiana make the college football playoff? I can't guarantee a yes 110% because this is Indiana. But yes, I do think they're going to make the college football playoff at 11-1. Too many teams from these other conferences have lost. You don't have one-loss Bama's lurking around. You don't have one-loss Georgia's. They all have 2 losses. I mean, this is honestly set up perfectly for Indiana, that all of these SEC teams have 2 losses. Maybe one of them leapfrogs Indiana, but they're not all going to leapfrog Indiana. And if they all do leapfrog Indiana, then that's absolutely bogus. I mean, legitimately bogus. Because, I mean, we're already having the argument being set by media members saying that, Indiana's not a better team than Georgia, Ole Miss, Bama, and Tennessee. Todd McShay said that earlier today. And it's like, okay, yeah, that's just a horrible statement, honestly, because nobody's saying Indiana's a better football team than those teams. But Indiana's won their games. These teams haven't won their games. So that's how it works. If you win your games, you're in. And if Indiana has 1 loss to the supposed second-best team in the nation in Ohio State on the road in the shoe, then they're in. They should get in. It's just a bad argument. It's honestly a terrible argument. And it's a shame that media members are already, bringing this up because they're trying to do Florida State 2.0. When they started the narrative that, Indiana, they're not going to get in with 11-1, just like with Florida State. If they don't beat Louisville by a lot, they're not going to get in. That's what was going on with Florida State. I mean, we remember that. We remember the whole case of, Florida State. If they didn't beat Louisville by more than like 10, then they were saying that, they're not going to get into the college football playoff. And that was a 14 playoff. And I get that with Jordan Travis out. I still understand it. I get with Jordan Travis out, it just didn't really justify that Florida State was the same team. And yeah, they would have gotten blown out. I mean, I get it. I absolutely get it. But at the same time, I mean, you're just ruining, college football's rules of if you win your games, you get in, you get rewarded. I mean, Florida State was undefeated. The other teams had 1 loss, Texas, Bama. I mean, I'm glad Alabama made the college football playoff, and Alabama absolutely was, a better team than Florida State, even with Jordan Travis. But Florida State won their games. and they didn't get in. They didn't get rewarded. And that's why everybody's like, oh, well, the Big Ten and the SEC, they own the sport now. And that's the thing. Indiana's in the Big Ten. Indiana's in the Big Ten. They're not in the Big 12 or the ACC, but Indiana still had a terrible schedule. They beat the defending national champions, who have the best defensive line in the country this year statistically. They knocked off Washington, who made the college football playoff last year. They beat Nebraska, who is supposedly one of the best young rising stars at quarterback. I don't understand the narrative of an 11-1 Indiana not making the college football playoff. It's absolutely insane, honestly. It makes absolutely no sense. It's just brand bias, and because these people want to see these SEC teams in the playoff instead. And I get it. I get why you do. The ratings will be through the roof if you put Georgia and Tennessee and all of them in there. And you know what? Most people probably want to see it. That's the thing. Most college football fans, especially the casuals, they would rather see that than Indiana. But if they put those teams in over Indiana, then what's the point of playing the games? What's the point of having a better record? It doesn't make sense. It doesn't. So Indiana should make the college football playoff at 11-1, and if they don't, it's absolutely horrendous. Now our next topic is 2 recruits flipped to IU. Indiana's had a great week. Not only has Indiana, gotten Curt Cignetti to stay by signing a big contract extension, we also had 2 recruits, quality recruits, flip to Indiana this week. Byron Baldwin, a 4-star safety. So, you talk about all these programs getting 5-star guys. That's what happens. Indiana doesn't get 5-star guys. So getting a 4-star guy like this is huge. The funny thing about it is, though, with Byron Baldwin, and this is how messed up college football recruiting is these days. It's just the way that it works, because you got NIL and programs trying to outbid each other. But Byron Baldwin was committed to Indiana months ago. He was committed to IU months ago. Indiana starts out their season, they're like 6-0, and then he just out of the blue, I decommitted. It looks like I'm going to Colorado. Then Indiana keeps winning. Indiana keeps recruiting him. Now he's going to Indiana again. It's honestly hilarious. I mean, I really don't get it, but regardless of the shenanigans, if he stays committed this time, which he said that I'm 1,000% committed on Twitter, even though he said that the last time and didn't stay committed. So I really don't know how much that matters. But still, it's a big deal. If he stays committed and actually suits up for IU next year, he's a talented player. He's got great size for the safety position, 6'2", 190. I mean, that's perfect size. He's one of the top players at his position. So, I mean, you're talking about like basketball, right? Like if you're the 180th ranked player in basketball, probably means you're good, but not great, because in basketball, there's less players, on the floor. Obviously, there's like 300 teams or whatever. So, I mean, there's so many players. But for the big programs, there's only enough great players to go around. But in football, there's so many people that play football at so many different positions. So being the 180th ranked player with all these programs getting players at all these positions, what more matters is the fact that he's 17th in his position according to 247 Sports. So Byron Baldwin is a very talented guy and definitely could be a sign of more to come for Indiana in the future of being able to get higher rated guys. Because even Curt Cignetti's already said, like, hey, since we've been winning on the recruiting circles, we can see a tone shift. Like players that before probably would have laughed us out of the building are now like, yeah, I want to consider going to Indiana. So the narrative's definitely shifting, and more guys like this that commit to IU and maybe have success, and Indiana keeps winning in the future. If they can go 8-4 next year and just keep on winning and being a consistently good program for years to come with Curt Cignetti, you're going to see more of this. You're going to see more higher-rated guys start committing to IU. But not only did Byron Baldwin commit to IU, or recommit rather, Tyrone Burris Jr., an edge rusher, 6'4", 235, who is a unranked player according to 247 Sports, but some recruiting services do rank him as a fairly high 3-star. He has committed to Indiana, and he never committed to IU in the past, but a few months ago, it was down to IU in Louisville, and he decided to commit to Louisville, which, I mean, makes sense. Jeff Brom's doing a good job down there. Louisville was very good last year, and they started out the season pretty good as well, even though they just suffered a disastrous loss to Stanford. But still, overall, they're doing pretty good. But what makes this more important is that Tyrone Burris is from Indianapolis, Indiana. He's an in-state kid, and Indiana has been really putting an emphasis with Cignetti of trying to get in-state guys. And there was actually one player for Indiana, going down the list, trying to remember exactly who it was. Davion Chandler at wide receiver from Lawrence North, Indianapolis, Indiana as well. He made a statement a while back, probably 2 or 3 weeks ago. He said that in-state guys come to IU. We're a different program now. So he's trying to help Curt Cignetti recruit in-state players. It worked for Tyrone Burris. Tough loss for Louisville because he is a rising guy. Even though, again, he's only ranked as a 3-star right now, he's been moving up in a lot of services. He has a lot of game. Very talented, very fast. He's only growing in his body. I mean, 6'4" for an edge rusher is pretty tall. Maybe he could get to 6'5". So, I mean, just 2 really good pickups for Indiana that they wouldn't have had this if they didn't go 10-0 this year. This is what winning does. Winning helps you recruit better. And now that more money is being put into the Indiana program, this is only going to help in the future. So definitely stay tuned for Indiana recruiting when it comes to IU football. It's only going to get better, I think. As long as Curt Cignetti keeps winning and IU keeps having success, you're going to continue to see higher and higher rated guys go to IU, and it's definitely going to change the product on the field for sure. But we got to talk about Indiana, Ohio State. It's the big game right here because this game, as I've already mentioned, is going to determine a lot for the college football playoff and also the Big Ten title race as well, because the winner of this game should make the Big Ten title game. It would basically be impossible for the winner not to make the Big Ten title game. I mean, there is a chance, there is a weird scenario somehow where the winner of this game doesn't. Like if somehow Indiana lost to Purdue, which even then, I still think Indiana would most likely get in, but maybe there's still a scenario where they don't. Maybe Penn State would leapfrog them then. I'm not 100% sure, but I do think that Indiana might still get in. But Ohio State, all they have to do is not lose to Michigan. If Ohio State loses to Michigan, then they would still miss the Big Ten title game. But the way Michigan's playing, you never know, though. You never know. You can't just, like throw it in the towel, shoehorn it in, pardon the phrase, the horseshoe with the Buckeyes. It's going to be at the shoe for Michigan, so it's going to be a tough game. But still, I mean, you would think Ohio State would be able to beat Michigan because Michigan has regressed hard this year. Still have a very talented defense, but their quarterback play is atrocious. So, I mean, as long as Ohio State, hits 20-something points, they should beat Michigan. And then, like I said, going to be at home. But you never know. You, again, can't shoehorn it in. It's a rivalry game. Anything can happen. But the winner of this game should make the Big Ten title game. But the difference with this game is that despite the fact that Indiana has had this great season that they've had, they're still 12-point underdogs. They were 9-point underdogs, but they moved it to 12. Everybody's backing the Buckeyes. I don't blame them. It's at Ohio State. And Ohio State has 5 stars out the yin. Indiana has 0 5-stars, which is hilarious. Why earlier today, Tommy Tuberville said that Indiana bought their team. And it's okay, everybody's buying their team. Indiana has no 5-stars. They're all 2 stars and 3 stars. Some were 0 stars. So, yeah, okay. Ohio State has tons of 5-stars. I mean, bringing in Will Howard, Quinshon Judkins, so many of these players that they brought in is because of NIL in the portal. It's legal now. Everybody can do it, so that's crazy. Well, looking at Ohio State's roster, I mean, Will Howard has been getting the job done. He's been getting the job done. He hasn't been spectacular. I mean, 186 at 255, 2,484 yards, 73% completion percentage. Those are all good. And 24 touchdowns and 5 picks. It's pretty good. I mean, he's just hasn't been spectacular. He's been good. He's been doing his job. And honestly, that's all he has to do to win this game. Because, I mean, I remember when they played Penn State, I think he only threw for 180 yards. He did have the pick 6, which was bad, which I really think if Indiana has a shot to win this game, they're going to have to force a defensive turnover. Ohio State's going to have to throw a pick or 2 in this game. You have to have a couple fumbles or something like that. Maybe get a score out of it. Honestly, when Penn State had that pick 6 on Will Howard, I was like, man, Penn State's got a shot to win. And then Penn State couldn't score at all. So, yeah, that's going to be big key as well for Indiana. We'll get to Indiana's side. But, yeah, they can't be like Penn State. They have to score because Ohio State's got tons of weapons. They're going to put up points. But Will Howard, been unspectacular. But he hasn't had to be spectacular for Ohio State to win. He's been good enough. And if he's good enough against Indiana, doesn't turn it over, just plays a mistake-free game, should be good to go. But then looking at the running back position, this is where Ohio State makes their bread and butter. Quinshon Judkins, Travion Henderson, the talented duo. That's why they brought Judkins over, because Henderson's really good, but they knew that bringing in Judkins was going to make a 1-2 punch that was going to be almost unstoppable at running back, and it has proved to be so. 700 yards for Judkins, 700 yards basically for Henderson, and you look at the touchdowns, 8 and 5, so 13 touchdowns. I mean, honestly, these stats could be better. With how talented these two players are, they probably need to be running the ball more. But these guys are still great. A great tandem. But then you go to receiver. Jeremiah Smith, him and Ron Williams have been the two freshman stud wide receivers this year. And at first, Ron Williams was getting all the headlines because he was just killing it out there. But unfortunately, Alabama's passing attack has been very up and down this year. So Ron Williams is kind of, let's say he's faded out of the picture, but like he's not getting talked about as much. Jeremiah Smith's probably going to win Rookie of the Year. Especially like for wide receiver or whatever. He's going to win a lot of awards. Jeremiah Smith's been great. 49 receptions, 865 yards. The fact that a freshman receiver leads their team in receptions at Ohio State is incredible, because Ohio State is like wide receiver U. Alabama's been as well for a long time, but Ohio State historically has been more wide receiver U than Bama outside of that stretch with Nick Saban. And Jeremiah Smith, leading the charge. It's impressive. Ron Williams is great, though. I still think that guy's a stud. But Jeremiah Smith is like definitely the definition of a wide receiver. I mean, he's a big body receiver. He kind of looks like DK Metcalf out there. I mean, he's not as big, but he's pretty big. But Jeremiah Smith, Indiana's going to have a hard time with him. 9 touchdowns on the year. Then you got Emeka Egbuka. He's been good for years. Carnell Tate as well, solid. Then it drops off, but Ohio State always has a talented receiving room. You can't fault that at all. And then when you look at their defense, I mean, just tons of talent. Sonny Styles, Cody Simon, Caleb Downs, the Alabama transfer. That was a very tough loss for Alabama in the offseason. Another one of the additions Ohio State had that was massive in the offseason that definitely helped their defense. Denzel Burke, a lot of people say that he's overrated, but still, he's a decent player. Overall, great defense for Ohio State. They got studs. They got more talented players than Indiana all across the board. Doesn't mean still that they're going to win. Absolutely does not. Indiana's going to have to play a fantastic game to win. It's possible. But Ohio State definitely just has a ridiculous talent advantage. Jack Sawyer as well is really good. Then you go to the Indiana side. Curtis Rourke. Missing, keep in mind, because a lot of people are going to say, I've said, Will Howard's unspectacular. Thing is, with Will Howard, the reason I say he's been unspectacular is the past few quarterbacks, besides Kyle McCord, the last few quarterbacks for Ohio State have put up really good stats, like insane stats. Will Howard's been kind of a step back overall, but still solid. For Curtis Rourke, 171 at 238, 2,410 yards, 71.8% completion percentage, which for an Indiana quarterback is insane. 21 touchdowns and 4 picks. That right there is fantastic for an Indiana quarterback. They have not had a guy like that in forever. Even Penix couldn't put up that good of stats because he missed so many games. He was always hurt, unfortunately, because of Indiana's bad O-line. And that's a big reason Indiana's been better this year. Their O-line is significantly better, which has helped Indiana compete. But Curtis Rourke, though, what's impressive is that he's missed a game and a half. Imagine if he had played in every game this season, all the games. His stats would be even better than this. He probably would have 2,700 yards and maybe 24, 25 touchdowns instead of 21. Having great stats. He's like 6th in the Heisman voting. It's just so impressive for Indiana to have a guy in the Heisman voting at quarterback. I didn't even think that was possible with all their O-line issues, but they've really fixed those problems. Rourke's been great. Then you look at Indiana's running backs. Justice Ellison, Tyson Lawton, way less talented than Judkins and Henderson, but not far behind in stats. And with rushing touchdown, 9 and 9, I mean, they've been almost better than Ohio State's running backs, but easier schedule. That is true. Easier schedule than the Buckeyes have faced, where they faced Oregon and Penn State. Indiana hasn't had those teams. Still with Michigan, though. But IU did not run the ball very well against Michigan. I will say that. But still, Michigan had the best D-line in the country, whereas Ohio State's D-line is like 22nd. Ohio State does not have as good of a defensive line as Michigan does, which is insane to say, because Ohio State historically, is like really good at D-line, and they still are, just fantastic defenders, but Michigan's been better the last couple of years. But then Indiana at receiver, Elijah Surratt, great season, 38 receptions, 685 yards, and 6 touchdowns. Had a couple of uncharacteristic drops against Michigan. Got to clean that up. You can't have drops on the road at Ohio State, and that's going to be the toughest thing for Indiana. They have not been in an environment like the Shoe all season. Their toughest environment on the road was at Michigan State, and Indiana basically took out Michigan State's environment by half with their play. So it's going to be a different environment in the shoe. You know, they're practicing for it with crowd noise, but nothing is like the real thing. It's going to be interesting to see, you know, if their adrenaline and just being hyped for this game can be enough for them to, you know, mute that crowd noise. Omar Cooper's been great this year. Miles Price, he got banged up against Michigan. It looks like he'll be back, though. It does look like Indiana's going to be at full strength. The only thing I'm worried about, though, is that Indiana's right guard, he's out for the season, Drew Evans. He got hurt in practice before the Michigan game. Tough thing about it is that was Indiana's weakness. With Drew Evans out, and in Michigan, it's great defensive line. Curt's work had a lot more pressure put on him than he's had in weeks past. So I do think that Indiana's going to have an issue with Ohio State's D-line. Ohio State, though, they have a couple linemen out as well. So maybe Indiana's D-line can take advantage, even though, again, way less talent. It's going to be interesting, though. Indiana, their offense is really good, but we saw against Michigan that it can stall against really good defenders. Indiana's kicking game's good, so is Ohio State. That's without even being said. But then Aiden Fisher, 98 total tackles, way more than Ohio State's top defender. Aiden Fisher's been great. Then Jalen Walker has been really good. Mikel Kamara, guy's a beast. 9.5 sacks on the year. Didn't have a sack against Michigan, but he was so close several times of getting Davis Warren to the ground. D'Angelo Pons is really, really good. But, man, I wonder, they're going to have to put him on Emeka Egbuka. I think. I mean, he's only 5'9". I don't think with Jeremiah Smith being like 6'4", I don't think they could put D'Angelo Pons on him, maybe put Sean Asbury on him, but he is probably the weaker defender overall. He's a good tackler, but I mean, D'Angelo Pons is fantastic at pass breakups, but probably have to put Pons on Egbuka, Asbury on Jeremiah Smith, but we'll see. You never know. Curt Cignetti might trust Pons to just be able to handle it. But Indiana's defense going to have to force Ohio State into a mistake or two, just like the Buckeyes will. I think whoever turns the ball over more will have a great shot to win. I think if Ohio State forces Rourke into a couple picks, most likely means the Buckeyes will have this game. So it's going to be interesting, but we got to predict this game. Who's going to win? Both teams are great. Indiana is a great team. I'm not afraid to say that. Indiana is a great football team. The only issue is that I have really two issues, but it's kind of all goes into the same thing. For one, you have that road environment. Indiana's not played against a team with that type of environment this season. They haven't played at Washington. They haven't played at Michigan. They haven't played at Nebraska. They played all those teams at home. And Indiana was very fortunate to play all those teams at home. Because if Indiana had to go to Nebraska and go to Michigan and go to Washington this season, probably they lose one of those games, maybe even two of them. It's a lot harder to win in those environments. And Ohio State is up there along with Michigan. I mean, with the amount of fans they pack into that stadium, over 100,000, it's going to be an insane environment. And even though some people say, well, Ohio State, actually, it's an overrated environment, it's not always that tough. For Indiana being a top 5 matchup, they're going to be loud for this game. And the other thing is that Indiana has not faced a team with this much talent this season. Even though Michigan was by far the most talented team they have faced this season, they barely won that game. They struggled with Michigan because Michigan's talent is massively above IU's. And Ohio State's even more so. So this is basically 2 firsts for Indiana. The most talented team they have faced and the toughest road test that they have faced with their environment. And that could be a problem for IU. Indiana cannot fall behind big early. They cannot fall behind big early. If it goes down like 17-0 Ohio State, it's going to be very tough to come back. Back in that 2020 game, they went down 35-7 against the Buckeyes in the shoe, but there were no fans. That was the pandemic year. There were no fans, and Michael Penix did leave them back to 35 all before they ended up ultimately losing 42-35. But if there were fans in the stadium, it would have been a lot harder with the Buckeyes going crazy, being up 35-7. So if you let the crowd get into it and Ohio State's pumped, it's going to be very hard to come back. Honestly, I think the game needs to stay around tied or Indiana have a slight lead for most of the game for them to win. Does Indiana have a chance to win? Yes, because they're so well coached with Curt Cignetti and their players are so well disciplined, they can win this game. Do they have to win this game to make the playoff? No, they don't. They can lose and still get in. They can't get blown out. I don't think they're going to get blown out. I honestly don't, and I do think they can win this game. I do very well think that they can win this game. But Ohio State's talent advantage is so vast, and it is on the road. Toughest game they faced all year. I am going to pick Ohio State to beat Indiana 31-21. I think Indiana hangs with the Buckeyes for the vast majority of the game. I think it's going to be pretty close, but I do think that Ohio State at the end, with their talent advantage, will pull off a couple big drives, and they will survive against Indiana. I hate saying it. I've picked Indiana to win every game this year, even Michigan. I picked every game. I've gone 10-0 with the Hoosiers this year, even though I picked them to go 7-5 in the preseason. Since they've started winning all these games, I picked them against Nebraska. I picked them against Michigan. I picked them against Washington. All those games, Michigan State, but this is the first game that I can't pick them. They can win. They absolutely can win, and I hope they do. It'd be so awesome for Indiana to get the Buckeyes off their back, get their first win over them in 35, 36 years, and lock up a college football playoff bid, even though they still should get in with a loss. I think they're going to fall short. And a 31-21 loss should not knock them out of the playoff. If it does, it's ridiculous, but I think they still will be fine for the college football playoff. But we have some people here. We've got Jackson saying, what's up, Hoosier Nation? Appreciate it, Jackson. Got Jeff as well. Steven saying, hit the like button. Appreciate it. Steven Cherry, absolutely hit the like button. Subscribe if you are new as well. Trying to build up the channel. Like the stream down below. Subscribe to the channel if you are new. If you're an Indiana fan or not, does not matter. Would really appreciate it if you guys sub. Stephen Cherry says, win or lose versus Ohio State, Indiana deserves a playoff bid. These schedules are made years out. Absolutely. And again, it doesn't matter that the opponents in Indiana's face are worse this year. They're still good teams. And they're in the Big Ten. And all these other teams have more losses. So, yeah, I agree. Thank you, Stephen. I agree 100%. Stephen says, Cignetti reminds me of Barry Alvarez taking over Wisconsin back in the day. Great comparison. Love it. People are saying Nick Saban. I mean, yeah, he gives Saban vibes. He does. But I think Barry Alvarez is a fair comparison. Stephen Cherry says Big Ten and SEC will get 4N. TV partners and money dictates who gets in. Absolutely. And Indiana's been a much better TV draw lately. Yeah, they've been playing like Michigan. Michigan had a lot of the viewers, but that Indiana-Michigan game was the third highest viewed game last week. So, yeah, Indiana drawing in people. Letter B says, who do you leave out for Indiana, Tennessee, Notre Dame? Yeah, Notre Dame's the other one. I didn't even mention Notre Dame earlier when I was talking about the playoffs. If Notre Dame wins out, they get in. But still, there's enough room for Penn State, Notre Dame, and Indiana all with one loss to be in the playoff. Honestly, though, if Notre Dame lost again, that would help Indiana even more. I know Will doesn't want that to happen. Hopefully, for Will's sake, Notre Dame does win out, makes the playoff. But still, if Notre Dame did lose again, it would help. Letter B says, I want to see the best teams play each other. Absolutely. Appreciate Jackson saying for everyone, even the cashiers at Publix, doesn't matter where you're the cashier at. It could be Fred Meyer's, it could be Safeway, Albertsons, doesn't matter. Appreciate if you guys would check out Indiana, the voice of college football, and also my channel, Only Talk Sports. Definitely appreciate that, Jackson. Jackson said, don't forget to tell the cashiers at Publix about the magic that happens on Alabama Calling Show. Absolutely. Every Thursday night, always a fun time with me and Jackson over on the Alabama channel. Minnesota over Penn State, 31-24, says Steven. That's a good upset pick. I don't know if I'll pick that or not. I might pick it. I'll have to think about that. Minnesota's weird, man. They're weird. And honestly, that's another game that would help Indiana. If Minnesota beats Penn State, anybody with one loss, like your BYUs, your Miamis, Notre Dame, Penn State, for all of them to lose again, absolutely would help, Indiana's chances of getting in. Jeff says, can't wait to see what happens. I hope Indiana gets in the playoff. Absolutely, Jeff. Steven says, I've got Ohio State 38-17 over Indiana. Close in the first half. Buckeyes pull away in the second half. That's fair. Leo says there's talk about leaving Rourke on the bench to protect him for the playoffs. Well, I will say this. He's got to play versus Ohio State no matter what happens. Because if Indiana gets blown out, there will be talk of leaving them out of the playoff, which is ridiculous, but they will do it. The talk will be there. So they have to compete versus Ohio State. They can't bench it. Now, against Purdue, maybe you can do that, but you still want to win, right? Like Taven Jackson's playing, and it's a close. Like you don't want all the hard work you've done this season to go out the tubes because you sit Rourke and then you end up losing to Purdue after losing to Ohio State. Because a 10-2 Indiana is not getting in. Absolutely not. So I would play Rourke regardless. If he gets hurt, I mean, that it is what it is. You don't want that happening, but it is what it is. You're just going to have to go with Taven Jackson. And honestly, I don't think Taven Jackson's that big of a drop-off from Rourke as people would want you to believe. I don't think it's as bad as, like, Travis being gone from Florida State and their backup quarterbacks were terrible. Taven's worse, but he's not terrible. I wouldn't bench Rourke, but if people are saying it, that's crazy. I hope that's not the case. Steven says if Hoosiers are smart, they would target Denzel Burke. Absolutely. There's a lot of players that Indiana can get. It's going to be interesting because they got a big recruiting class already. They're going to lose a lot of players, a lot of seniors. So I wonder how many players Indiana will get in the portal, but Cignetti is going to have to target the portal. He's going to have to find a way to get a couple more solid players in the high school recruiting class because, yeah, you're going to have to compete. You got to bring in good players to compete. And they brought in the right group of guys this year. Got to do it again next year if you want to keep winning, or people will just end up saying it was a one-hit wonder, and you definitely do not want that. But thanks, everybody, for being here. Like the stream down below. Subscribe to the channel if you're new at the Indiana channel, the Voice of College Football, or the Big Ten channel if you're watching over there. Definitely would appreciate it. Check out my YouTube channel, Only Talk Sports, if you want to find content on college football and all the other sports as well. Definitely would appreciate it. We got a big game coming up this Saturday. Indiana and Ohio State, the game of the week. Can the Hoosiers knock them off? Can they knock off the Buckeyes? Something they haven't done in almost 4 decades. I think they can, but I am going to go with Ohio State to win. Regardless, still do believe Indiana can get the – okay, yeah, Denzel Burt, my bad. I was thinking of someone else. There is someone else. I think there is a Denzel in the portal. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, absolutely. Ohio State's Denzel Burt, 100%. 100% Indiana has got to go at him because he is the weak guy. Everybody for Ohio State has said that he's not one of their better defenders. I think he's okay. He is overrated, but I think he's still okay overall. But definitely, you put Surratt on Burke on an island, I think Surratt can win that matchup downfield. Yeah, definitely had a little bit of a brain fart on that one. But yeah, I was thinking of portal. And we're already getting close to portal season, so there's a lot of talk with that too. So stay tuned at Indiana, the Voice of College Football, for all that portal news is going to be coming down the pipe. But appreciate you being here tonight, Steven, Jeff, Jackson, Leo, and everybody else, the letter B as well. Can't wait for the game. It's going to be big, and we'll definitely be having the post-game reaction for that game sometime during the weekend. I'm not 100% sure when. Won't be right after the game, but definitely we'll be able to do that eventually. And hopefully it's a good result for IU, but I'm sure you'll be excited, Steven, if Ohio State can win as well. It's going to be a great game. Appreciate you for stopping by tonight, everybody. Big game for IU, and hopefully the Hoosiers can go 11-0 with a win over Ohio State. Thanks for being here, everybody. Go Hoosiers.